Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Alana James, and today's webinar is on the challenge of bringing your topic involves the very targeted need to build consistency between all the parts of your research design. Now, I had left the topic quite open so that people could respond to their particular needs in www.wooclap.com/topic method, which I've just put up in the chat for the people who are in the room. And it is your opportunity to anonymously go there and type in what you're considering and the challenges you would like me to address in this webinar. So I have one answer, and I'm more than happy to interact with more if some of the people who are now in the room would like to go there and do that. If not, today's going to end up, and I don't mean that as a discouraging thing, the topics that are easily and well covered include the basic steps, all the parts you have to have in a solid design, generally how it drives the process, iterative process through, and tools that are available to you through your university.doctoralnet or .pd.education sites to enhance your journey. So those things will be covered for sure. And if there are particular questions that we need to answer, then I will address those as well. And I have that open on my other screen. So if you want to add something at any time there, you can. Or if you're in the room and you want to add something in chat, you can. So lots of options to make this webinar as perfect for you as it can be. All right, let's just talk for a minute about the fact that even Madame Curie was saying that progress was neither swift nor easy. If you are new to research design and you are involved in building a proposal perhaps or getting the first things done, it can be a very frustrating period of time because you're looking for I do this and then I do this and then I do this natural progression, and research design seldom has that. So just be aware you're in good company, and lots of people have figured it out before you, and you too will find the right supports and the right answers to get there. There's also a couple other things that I can mention. One is that I wrote a book on this that's in very detailed how you get these things done. It's published by Sage. And another thing is that if you're lucky enough to have a pd.education or DoctoralNet website given to you by your university, then you can go there and sign on with your username and the password given to you. And then you can search by phases. That's the menu. And the search by phases menu lists this entire process step by step, milestone by milestone. And some people find it helpful, especially if you're along the way and it's a little stuck. Sometimes it's useful to go back and look at all the steps and see whether or not there might have been something that wasn't addressed or that you didn't understand. So our goals and agenda for today are to give an overview of what is needed in research design, all the parts, to talk about the process, and as we talk about the process, to show you tools, and then to be able to answer your questions that came in through WooClap. And we have an exercise at the end. So once again, it's wooclap.com. Topic method is the title, and I'm happy to help. So let's go through the general parts first. We can do this quickly, and then you can sort out what you need. You have to know where you're going. If you don't, you won't get there very fast. And so this circle is very useful to just make sure you've got all the parts in place when you think you're finally done. Now, this is not the way that they develop when you're putting together your research usually. So I'm going to go through how that develops, even though you need to have this research design in your head as well. Does that make sense? Some bubbles get filled in at different times. So you decide on a topic, and now you're in presentation mode. So you're presenting first a topic, and then your indicators that there's some kind of local situation or some kind of need in your field or some kind of problem. That can be a number of things, but there's an indicators that there is something worth studying that other people agree should be studied. Then you develop a problem statement. You come up with the purpose of your research. And those things, by the way, are covered. That's the argument that you go through in chapter 1. You also in chapter 1 introduce your research questions and hypothesis. Chapter 2 is about your theory, your literature, and the literature develops a theoretical stance and leads you towards your methodology. It also backs up your purpose, your problem statement, and in some cases, your indicators of a problem. So you have to have some kind of predetermined, pre-established need or agreement that because of this theoretical or sometimes conceptual stance, these problems can be addressed in these questions, and you can go collect data according to the methodology you have chosen. You will be able to analyze that data. And then, so that's your whole design. Once you're working the design, you're asking questions, you're developing things, then you have your findings, your data gets analyzed, you develop your chapter 4 through the what data was there and how you analyzed it, and then your findings lead your reader back into your topic, what you learned about the local situation, etc. So it's a circle. It goes around and around. Those are all the parts. And if you are just starting, raise your hand if you are in the room and you are at the beginning stages of this. The hand is in the chat box. So if hands go up, I'll say a few more things. If you're not in that, we'll go quickly through the nest, and perhaps there's some people watching by recording that are just beginning. So if your degree, looking at the questions on the screen, if your degree is not a PhD, if you're a professional doctorate, do you do the same steps? Yes, probably. What if you won't be doing a dissertation or a thesis? What if you'll be writing three chapters or 3 journal articles for your outcome? Will you still need research design that goes through all those steps? Probably. Some journals aren't too strong on needing a theoretical stance, etc. There can be variations. But in general, if you have this research design framework printed out in some place you can see, and you're putting it all together, it is useful to have it for both the design phase and also for the writing phase, because your reader needs you to be able to see all the parts. These are the thoughts, in other words. What I'm trying to say is, when I'm reading a journal article, I expect to see this rotation. When reading an article in a chapter, these parts of this rotation will be alluded to. So Yolanda, I see you raising your hand, and thank you for that. Even though it's not an arm, you did well with finding the emoticons. I don't know why the arms aren't up. It's a palm. Anyway, so we have some people in the room who are further along and some not, so I'll try to go at a moderate pace. So first step, get those things in your head. Second step, keep it in your mind that this process is iterative, and that's why I'm going to go through it as a process rather than as a bubble by bubble by bubble on the diagram. You will meet certain things all the way along. So let's say you started on the outside, you're going towards the inside. You start by reading some literature, and then you begin to think you have a topic, and then you begin to think you have a methodology, and you go back and you find that other people in the literature are strongly recommending other things, and it evolves. That's just one example. But it will be more like a spiral going inward than it ever could be like a straight line or a path. It is, in fact, the fabric of everything that is academic life. So iterative nature is what we do. And literature, you read your literature, which drives your problem ideas. And you begin to think of, well, I could do this, which drives these. There's something here worth studying that interests me. So I'm going to look up what I can do about a research idea. Then I check out that more definitive kind of research, because now you've gotten smaller, not such a broad base in your literature. And you see that there's some things in that, how other people have done certain kinds of methodology. And you begin to develop your methodological ideas, which drive the literature again. You ground into your ideas with some theory, because you're going to have to pin it up. You're going to have to build a foundation for it. And that's your theoretical or conceptual stance. And then you present your design. When it passes, you are ready to start to write. So this is what it looks like, and here are some tools. Literature is where we all start, and what everything goes back to. Remember, the most important thing is that it interests you, and because it will be a long process, and you don't want to be in a long process with something. It's like being in a marriage when you can't stand your mate. So really, you have to be interested. And we have some tools that may help. If you sign on to a pd.education site, you can look in, there's a menu called Search by Phases. And in that is major milestones. They are your chapters. They are what people are asking of you at your university. Minor milestones are all the little steps that go into getting the understanding that allow you to have those major milestones. And there's a milestone checklist there, and you can, or you can just go use it on the site. And there are articles that back up all of those things. You can also, we previously did a webinar on using bibliographic software and spreadsheets together. I have a link for that later on in the slides. And by the way, the slides are up in the handouts. And so bibliographic software has some help for you in organizing your ideas as you go along. Don't just think about, oh, I have to catch this in my software. Think about, where do I want to stash it? And then set up groups for yourself so that your ideas evolve, but the references that went into backing up those ideas are still placed off to the side in a group. So when you want to go back and revisit that idea, there are all the people who added up to it. Very helpful. Because this is a lot of stuff you collect as you go through these. Those things together drive your problem ideas. You have to have something you're measuring. You have to have some driving need or a gap in the literature that you find that you have some enthusiasm about helping your field not have that gap anymore. And this is the front end of the site that is our demo site, but most of you will have a Your University Here logo. And the answer to your question, Adrian, about the original DN site is you can go to demo.doctoralnet.com and you can register and sign in there. So that's the replacement for main, and this would actually be the site you would be working out of. And no problem with the sidetracking. So if you see on whenever you go into that site, there's a to-do list, and the red arrow is pointing to where we have stashed the self-assessments. They are very helpful for this. And you can see at the top the menu Search by Phases. So if you went to the self-assessment, there would be what we used to call automations on problem state on your problem. And you could go through it and fill it out and then go through the criteria for problems and see whether your ideas meet those criterias. It helps you have the kind of difficult conversation you might have with a supervisor prior to getting to that conversation. Because there are a lot of criteria that you, as you are beginning, you may not know about. And so the self-assessments are designed to help you do that. Go through those. Same thing. So that literature drives your research idea. There are self-assessments, again, in the same place. One for testing out your topic, one for testing out your research questions. And that's often a multiple iteration. You might go through these over and over again. And then even while you are writing, you might slightly tweak your questions so that the consistency that drives throughout your document holds. Then you go back and you check these new ideas against your literature. And at that point, you might, and here's the link I talked about in the slides, this using a spreadsheet to keep track of literature link will take you to the webinar that we had a few weeks ago that talked about bibliographic software and how to use a spreadsheet in tracking literature. So you're now sort of along your way. You've got an idea for your topic. You've got an idea for your problem. You're beginning to think about how it might be measured in your context. And methodological choices are very contextually driven. So one of the things that I see is that students will come and have an idea, but they can't get easily to the people who could solve those, who could do that survey. They might have a survey idea. They might want to send it out, but they don't have any vehicle to get to the people who would answer that survey. So if your methodology, if you're a humanities-oriented person and your methodology is going to include people, you need to be able to get to the people. If you're an engineer and your methodology is going to include a simulation, you need to be able to have the tools you need to make the simulation work. If you're a biologist, you get my drift. You have to be able to get to the things that your methodological choices require of you. And then you also have to have an understanding of the methods themselves. This is written as though you're a humanities person, but how big your sample would be, how big your population would be, if you're doing a quantitative study, how many people have to answer before you have power in your results. These things drive the literature and back to the literature, because now you're looking for whether or not your reader will have all the pieces you have now understand a lot. You understand about your field, you understand about your methodology, you're pretty close to being able to wrap this whole thing up. You have your methods, you know your analysis, and now you have to consider your reader. Your reader needs to understand what you understand in as short a period of time as possible. So the logic of design tool is one of our very best tools. It's hidden in the same place under self-assessments. And it takes you through these first pieces. It takes you through what is your question, what's your problem, what's your questions, what methodology you're going to use. And then at the very bottom, it asks you what literature you need. And you can go through the other answers you wrote, and it shows you how to pull out what your reader needs in order to understand your basic process. Okay, so those are the pieces. Theoretical and conceptual can come into your line of thinking at many points. If you're a PhD student, and especially if you're a psychologist or in psychiatry or any of those fields, probably you come to these topics with a lot of philosophical understanding. If you're in the humanities, you might not. And if you're in the sciences, you may or may not be introduced to theoretical understandings as you go along. One way to get to them is to go back to your literature, look at the people you really admire, what they have done, and see how they are discussing theory and discussing, perhaps in some cases, it's not a theoretical stance or framework, it's a conceptual stance or framework. That's covered in another part of our series. So look to see how other people have done it. See if that works for you. Maybe bring out 2 or 3 that are your favorites. And then it's a good time to take all of these ideas to your supervisor or advisor and lay out how you see this cycle of things going so far. It might not be a cycle for you. You might draw a diagram that's very different of how the pieces go together. It's a good time to diagram your ideas so someone else can look at something while you're explaining it. They can understand how you're going, and then you can decide where you want to take the theoretical or conceptual work. Now, there is some little bit of technology that can help you there. You can use the search on our sites. There's also, you can go to the milestones again, and there's some possibilities. And if at this point I had to put in, by now, it is possible when you're this far into it, you're getting a little discouraged if things aren't going as well as you want. So as a lighthearted moment, you might want to opt in at this point for the Monday motivation emails, just because they'll lighten your life a little. You present your design, including all of these parts. It is definitely the time to show it to the people who are responsible for you at your university. And then this is a list of tools that might help you as you go. When you don't even know what your questions are, then you go to the milestones in the phase 1 menu, and that gives you a process. If you know what your questions are, then you search. You can also do a category search. There are 10 underlying categories that we find lots and lots of students search on. And so you can just search by those categories and look at everything that's under that category. Sometimes when you're figuring things out, that can be quite helpful, just to check out what's available. And then when you think you've got it, you definitely go to the automations, put in the different parts, see what the criteria is. That gives you PDFs, and you can take whichever parts of those pieces you need or want to help your advisor understand your thinking. It's very useful for advisors if it's not just something that's not brought to us just as a topical conversation. These are pretty intense topics and pretty intense conversations. So it's useful to see things written, to see maps of how the ideas flow. So some of our responses can be more targeted to your need. So I'm going to leave it up to the people in the room, and we'll see whether or not any more have come in on WooClap. But there is this exercise. If you wanted to decide where you were in the process, go to that slide. You've been given the slides, and play with the tools described there. And then you can come back to me, or no longer can you post them to Skype and DoctoralNet. So, but you can post them to me at my email address and go through the rest. I'm happy to help people who attend this particular session. And I'm also going to suggest that you might want to sign up for PhD Scholars, because we're going to go in 5 sessions in January, 5 live sessions on Fridays. We're going to go through the parts of the process, for each chapter, what it's supposed to have in it, and people can ask questions about the actual challenges you're facing. we used to call this the accelerator program, and we had many students write about how useful it was. So we're reinventing that for the new year, for 2020. Now, there's several people in the room, and I've gone to the Woo Clap, and what I see is one question, two questions. Good, thank you for adding. What if my methodology and data analysis are the first of their kind? How do I structure my chapter 1 to reflect that accordingly? Do I need a background section? Your question really amounts to, you have two things that have to happen in chapter 1, and both impinge on this question. First off, your reader has to understand what they're reading and why it's important. That builds the significance of your study overall. And if you are designing both methodology and through the design of the methodology, your data analysis structure, then your reader needs to understand the need for that redesign. And so that's the problem, really, or a portion of the problem. It may be that you have a particular background section that is the background of the questions you're asking and the problems in the real world. And then you may have another background section that is a background into the methodological choices that you have, and then why the need for new methodology and new data analysis. Both of those will need to be addressed in the first chapter. Now, just to say that these documents you're writing are art, they're not prescriptive. So where you put those two different bits of background could be in a couple of different places, but you can come back to, what does my reader need in order for them to understand both the significance of my questions in the world and my significance of this new methodological and analysis choices that I've made. And more can be discussed in the sessions in January if you want to be a PhD scholar, because these are very interesting, and everyone has the option of thinking for your reader and kind of rearranging the elements so that they sync better for you. Now, of course, that's always done in you have to just have these discussions with your supervisor. But the more you've thought about it before, and the more you have an argument for why you're doing what you're doing, the more likely they just say, oh yeah, these are good ideas, and let you go forward. How to determine methodology for a new research question. Prior literature is limited. So you heard, so the question, this person very smart, how to determine the methodology for a research question. So you've got a research question you're going to study. You really like this. You really want to know this. Now, how are you going to study it? The first step would be you go to similar. You always have a model, a series of models that you've looked at before, that you've done some critical analysis of other people's dissertations that are similar enough to yours. One perhaps has a similar methodology to what you're considering, one that has perhaps topical considerations, one that is absolutely from your supervisor if you can, if not your supervisor, at least your university, one that you think is particularly well written. You have these out, you've critically designed it, and analyze the different parts of them, and you can go to your Doctoral Net or PD.education site, and you can go to your account over in the right-hand column, pull down, and there's a on-demand webinar section, and the analysis, how to do that analysis, is carefully laid out for you in the on-demand webinars on beginning your master's with the end in mind, or beginning your PhD with the end in mind. So you've got these, and you have seen that people that are in the literature of your field are doing methodologies that aren't what you want, or perhaps your gap is that they've only done quantitative and you think some qualitative evidence is necessary, or you've only done qualitative and you think some quantitative size is necessary. For that last one, to determine methodology, if everybody's doing one thing and you think really you need the human story, then you need to have some kind of qualitative methodology, because it's the qualitative methodologies that give us the human story. There's a lot of human story there, but there's nothing about the big populations in the world or the global context in the world. And if you have access to getting those data, then you would think about doing a quantitative study and you begin to look into that. So that might be the either or choice that this question gets us to. But there's some other choices about methodology. If you want to get something practical done with your research, then you might consider action research. And it happens to be my personal favorite. If you are in organizational development or any of the medical fields where you're testing something, doing something new, then an iterative process research design, and there are several. Action research is one, design thinking is one, and the third will come to me. Each of them involve going out with your ideas and getting some feedback, analyzing that feedback, and then going out again and getting more feedback. So that, and you can go out and take actions, and the feedback can be on your actions. So there can be a series of things you do for a methodology, depending on the outcome you want to have and whether or not it is in action. So not sure if, I think that those ideas might be the process you need. And if the person who wrote that question wants to ask it again, then I'm happy to have a little bit more insight and go further. So of the people left in the room, would you be interested in having a conversation with me about the specific ideas on, and I'll go back to the question, to the circles. Is there any part of this that is challenging to you right now? Are there any questions you might have? For instance, you know, the challenge I find is a good sentence stem to kick off. Sometimes it's hard to know how to ask a question, but a challenge I'm having is, or I found that if I did this, this happened, that's another. These things, because they have interaction with each other, you find that you just had the perfect problem statement, and then the purpose of your piece was called into question by someone, etc. So perhaps that would be helpful. And if it is, it looks like you can raise your hand. I wanted to check since Yolanda had difficulty. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand so I know one is coming. And I'll wait for a minute. And the same thing goes for those of you who are watching by recording. This WooClap of wooclap.com/topic method will stay open. And at the end of December, as I did for the first couple of months of the year, I will write out all the questions that we got and answer them, or our team will, and they will be in the January newsletter. And I don't know if you saw the December newsletter, but they had the something that you could click through to that gave you the specific answers to those questions that were asked in the first couple of months, with lots of links and lots of helpful possibilities. So any questions from the people in the room? I don't see hands going up. So if not, I will, there we go. Could you type the websites you were referencing as well as saying them? Of course I could. So, David, what university do you go to? Okay, good. So you go into, but so the reason I asked for everybody who also was trying to catch that real quick, David goes to UMN in Minnesota. So if you are one of the universities that has a site, then you type in the first three letters of your university. So that is umn.pd.education in most cases. I'll tell you the exception in a minute. So you go to that website, and then the pictures, just to keep answering your questions. When you go to that website, it has your logo up here, and then this is exactly the same look, and you sign in right there to your self-assessment and other things. So everything will be available to you through umn.pd.education. If someone here is coming from Texas A&M in College Station, they decided not to go for the pd.education this year, and so they maintained the original site for them, which was tamu.doctoralnet.com. So that would be your site if you attended Texas A&M. And then everything else holds true. You would search by the phases if you needed the step-by-step. The on-demand videos are there also on your to-do list, as are the self-assessments. So all the things I talked about, plus a lot of video content down below. Excellent, no problem. If you are not a university that has one of these sites available, then you can write to me at alana@doctoralnet.com, and there may still be an option for you. So I don't mind getting that email as well. Any other questions in the room? David, thanks for your question. I'm sure two people at least that are watching by recording have the same question. Is there an inherent problem in wanting to do a PhD dissertation on a topic in which you are a director? Yes. Or have administrative responsibilities? Yes, there is. Now, can it be worked around? Possibly. So it's about bias. It's about the fact that if you want, to the extent that people who are under you in a hierarchical structure see you asking questions, they will naturally want to give you the answers they think you want to hear. So you have to really bury yourself not to have that happen. I worked with one man who was at a large company, and his company had done a lot of work recently on improving some human resource capacity issues. He got their permission to look at whether or not there was a a test at 1 year had significant difference in an evaluation test at another year, that required some different things, some different permissions, etc. And the company supported what he did enough to have the research questions, etc., come from the HR person or through the HR person to be anonymized. So even though and I might have that a little wrong, but you can do things where the stuff coming into you has gone through someone else and is anonymous to you. That's one way of going. Another is that there's a complete step of blindness in between. Probably what you can't do is the interviews yourself, or one-on-one conversations. Probably there's too much bias there, and there's just no way that you're going to be able to do that. Marketing people, of course, have the owners of the company behind a glass window that looks like a mirror when they do interviews. And that wouldn't work for you either, because you'd know the people. So it's a twofold problem. One is they want to give you the answers you want. The other is that they need to be assured that it will have no negative output on them no matter what answer they get. And that can be difficult in a director or administrative position. So yeah, those are your challenges. They have been worked through, depending on all the little things that go along with your particular circle. If I were you, actually, I would see if I could find someone else's work that was close enough to your study that might have had the same problem and how they solved those problems. If you can find an example in literature of how it was done before, you have a much stronger argument to make when you're trying to get it past your own IRB and etc. So what other questions? What other challenges you're facing? It's another 15 minutes here. I'm happy to help you very personally, and it's useful to people watching by recording to hear your questions, because they too may be having similar questions and need you to speak up. If you want to be anonymous with your question, you can also put it up in www.wooclap.com/topic method. And it's open on my other screen, and I'll see a new one come in. If you're some people joining us. We're almost at the end, so this is available by recording. Glad that you joined us. And the question actually right now that you could use if you're interested is to say, what is, that's fine, Kevin, no problem, because it's available by recording. This is the overview that we talked about. We talked about the fact that it doesn't happen nicely. You don't get your topic and then get the next one and then the next one. It happens iteratively. And so putting it all together in a nice rounded circle can be difficult. You have to just keep coming back to the different parts. So the rest of the slides will give you places that you can go and some tools that will be helpful to you. And they're up in the handouts. But if you have experience with parts of this that are difficult or challenging, you might put that up, and we can play off of that to see if perhaps there are some ways to make it easier. If you're up against, I'm not having trouble finding, or I have this topic and it's just not going together well with this methodology, I'm happy to help with those things too. In doing a literature search, how many references are enough? And how recent do they need to be? Is 20 years old too old? Yes, probably for most universities it is, with a caveat. Okay, so not every university puts quantification on these figures, but I did work for one university at one point that did, and it said you had to have 75 references at least, and they needed to be no older than 5 years old. There's caveats on that. One is that it is better to be able to drill down to some seminal pieces of work, and those happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So if you're discussing someone whose work fostered an entire portion of the field, and you're building off of that, it's useful to your reader to read some of those things as well. Now, the publishing world has copped on to the fact that the seminal work is important and that it doesn't get cited very much if it's older than 5. So they often will republish a seminal work sooner, and then that'll get you past the 5. Some of your universities will be very particular about that. They will look at everything in your reference list and it must be just so, and that's it. Others will be more concerned that your ideas are crisp and that your argument is strong, and they won't pay so much attention. So it's useful for you to have a conversation with people who are up against graduation recently and find out what your university pays close attention to, because there's a lot of variation on that. That's right. It's not too old if it's seminal work. Seminal work can go back 30 years, actually. It can go back to the 60s and 70s, depending on your field. And some of those writers are just amazing. You wish you could be that thoughtful. And some of the people writing today will be that in another 20 years. So, Godfrey, welcome to joining us. You caught us just at the end, but this is fine, not to go away. We are discussing this circle and the parts of it. You're welcome to ask any question that imposes on your particular challenges, and we'll keep going for another 10 minutes. How do you access slides after the recording? So a secret with Big Marker is that the same link that got you in here when you signed up, the registration link, is the same link that gets you to the recording once it is published. And in general, recordings are published about 24 hours after they go on. Sometimes they're published 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Depends on a couple of things that are just purely personal here when people are in the office in Europe to check the webinar and to publish. Okay, so if you have very interesting to know about the issues with slides after the webinar has been posted, this is a challenge with the technology that we are working carefully with, because we've had a lot. Used to be no problem, then it's a bit of a problem. Now we're trying to figure out with the company that we partner with exactly how that is. You all work in a technological world, so you understand these things. But you can always write, and I'm going to put her name in here. Siobhan is how you say it, at doctoralnet.com. She is the keeper of webinars, both getting them published, having them be published, getting them up for other uses, and having the slides that can be sent on to you. So slides are always there. Sometimes there are other things, and she should have them. So that's the email you need. What qualitative software do you recommend, and are they all pretty much the same? No, they're not all pretty much the same. Adrian, who's in the room with us, is a great in vivo user. I think that's still true, Adrian. Perhaps you found something else you like. I used Atlas TI when it was my turn to do qualitative software. There are some new ones that are less expensive. That have a lot of useful features. So what I would look for is how easy are they to use and how deep do you need to go. So once again, if you have a model of a qualitative dissertation or thesis from your university, and then you look at the qualitative sections, and maybe you pull up 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and you look at the qualitative methodological write-up, and you see how detailed it is and what they do. Because it can go that extra into charts and tables that can be pulled. And if those are necessary for the standards that you have to match, then you should have those available in your software. If they're not necessary, if what you need is to be able to code things and then pull up the codes separately so you can run from top to bottom, here are all the people that I coded this way, and here's what they said, and here are all the things I coded this way, and I'm looking at how many codes look like this was their answer and how many codes look like this was their answer, and I'm doing a comparative study of those kinds of things. That's pretty simple. And you could go for a pretty simple kind of software, because what you need is coding and counting of the codes and ability to stash them in different places so you can rearrange them. Some softwares will have the ability to ask questions of the software. I haven't done it a lot, but I've had limited luck with whether or not they could answer the questions. But it was a useful thing to, how in-depth they come and how they are set up to go often is determined by what part of the qualitative world they are working with. And some software companies get a lot of service from the marketing world. And so their questions might be more oriented that way. And some are very much academic. And so I remember that there was a page in Wikipedia that listed them all, their lots, and that might be a good place to kind of go look. Also, talk to your supervisor. If you have a qualitative person on your team, it's useful to use their same software they're familiar with, because they'll be able to help you with it. Deduce is an Atlas TI too. So Adrian has 3 recommendations: NVivo, Deduce, and Atlas TI. Deduce is the one that's done by researchers from University of Southern California. And so it has some advantages there. Yeah, no, I don't think Deduce can, or at least last time I looked at it, couldn't do crosstab queries. So good. Yeah, it's a good group. Thank you for answering as well, Adrian. Very practical questions. Sometimes those are the nicest to get answered. I notice I'm just sitting here looking at the research design frame, and I've got technical data collection, instrumentation, and ethics, because of course those are all part of the 3rd chapter in that one bubble. And I just want to say that a change is happening in the world, because research is much more global now than it ever has been before. And global ethics will be a topic that will be causing changes. So if you're just starting, keep your finger on that pulse, perhaps, because it is quite possible that a few years from now, when you're finishing, there will have been some changes there. The same thing with data analysis. Of course, you're all very aware that data visualization is changing that world very rapidly. So you need to be watching the places that it's changing so that you aren't caught out doing the old-fashioned thing when in fact it's time to graduate. And very good. So Adrian has given you a link. I'll read it to the people watching by recording. It's if you want to try your hands on Atlas TI for free, you can visit cloud.atlasti.com, and there will be a free test there. Very helpful. Another couple minutes. Anybody have anything else that is useful to you personally? Raise your hand if you're writing, because that'll keep me around. Here we go. Adrian says the cloud version of Atlas TI isn't its full function. Of course not, as the software version, but it is absolutely free for now. So they're testing getting it up too. It's probably something that's excellent. Good news. So if no one else has other questions, I'll say goodbye. Thank you all very much for either coming live or watching by recording. If you are a doctoral candidate or are working on a doctoral thesis of any kind, you can go to your university site, or you can go to OER. I got caught out. oer.pd.education, and look under resources, and the resources that are the experiences. The bottom one will have opt-in for PhD scholars, and then you'll be on our mailing list and you'll hear more as the new year starts on all the good things that are happening then. And then I don't know Max QDA. Adrian, do you know it? As is all things technology, it would not. It would. My guess is, if it is newer, and it might be, then it will have some slick possibilities and some cloud options and some collaborative options, and MVivo will have a lot of options. Has superb features like but. She's putting in the but. So it's in the same league, but as is often the case. Always the problem with asynchronous or synchronous that I know she's writing out the buts. is not as compatible with QDPX format. So it isn't easy for project format conversion across different QDA softwares. Okay, so there we have it. Software issues that need to be concerned. By the way, I heard of, for those of you who may be doing live interviews, have you heard of Trint? I have a student that I'm working with who uploaded her focus group interviews to Trint, and it's a software. They did an excellent job of transcribing it, almost instantaneously. It's a software-driven transcription that is just, at least in her case, very, very good. So that's an option for you as well. All right, lots of tools, lots of being helpful as we can, and I will say goodbye to all of you. And if I don't see you again, I wish you the very best of seasons through the rest of the year. And a few more things going on. If you were signed up for last Thursday's webinar, you know that Dr. Maria had an accident, and what wasn't here last week, we're looking to her to tell us if she'll do the next one in December or not. So good thoughts towards her for healing. And I hope you all have just excellent, excellent times and can get a lot of work done over this season. So all the best.